They thought firing me would be the end of the story. They were dead wrong. My name is Cameron Pierce. I'm 54 years old, and what happened in that boardroom last Thursday changed everything. But to understand how a 28-year veteran got publicly humiliated, then turned the tables on a cocky CEO, you need to know about the vintage Rolex in my pocket and the phone call that happened the Sunday before. Let me start at the moment it all went sideways. The premium coffee blend sat in my hands as I waited outside the conference room that Tuesday morning. Simple gesture, I told myself. A welcome gift for Adrian Cross, our new CEO who'd just started Monday. 28 years at Titan Logistics had taught me that respect mattered more than titles. I wanted his second day to feel like he was joining a family, not just taking over a company. But the moment I stepped inside, the air shifted. Adrian didn't smile. He didn't even look at the coffee. Instead, he straightened his tie and said with a cold clarity that cut through the room, "Cameron Pierce, your time here is over." The words didn't register at first. Around the table, two freshly promoted vice presidents sat stiff, their laptops open like they were waiting for me to argue. I looked at Adrian, waiting for some hint of a joke. There wasn't one. He slid a manila envelope across the polished wood, his eyes already dismissing me. My brain refused to process it. 28 years of midnight calls, supply chain rescues, crisis management, all collapsed into a single cruel moment. No acknowledgement, no thank you, just a surgical cut. You know what really got me? I'd been through worse. Back in the Navy, we had a saying, adapt, improvise, overcome. I'd spent 8 years learning that lesson the hard way, from boot camp in Great Lakes to logistics runs in the Persian Gulf. The military taught me that respect wasn't given. It was earned through competence and consistency. That's what I'd brought to Titan for nearly 3 decades. The humiliation got worse when Adrian leaned forward, making sure the entire room could hear. "This," he declared, tapping the envelope with his finger, "is the beginning of our digital transformation. Titan must shed its boomer mindset to survive, and Cameron's departure signals that change. Boomer mindset. I'm 54, not 72, but to him, anyone over 40 was obsolete. Gasps rippled through the silence. I felt every eye on me, not with respect, but with pity. My gift of coffee suddenly felt ridiculous in my hands. I set it down on the side table, the rich aroma now making me sick. I reached for the envelope. My fingers brushed against something in my jacket pocket. The vintage Rolex that Theodore Caldwell had given me just 2 days earlier. The weight of it reminded me of what Adrian didn't know, what nobody in that room knew. 2 days before this humiliation, I had signed papers that made me the majority owner of the company he thought he controlled. See, here's what Adrian didn't understand about experience. I didn't start at Titan as some executive hire. I started in the warehouse in 1996, fresh out of the Navy, 24 years old with a new wife and a baby on the way. Linda was pregnant with Jason, and we needed steady work with benefits. The military had given me discipline and logistics training, but civilian life was different. Those early years were rough. I worked swing shifts, loading dock doors when drivers called in sick, learning every piece of equipment in that warehouse. I missed dinners, missed bedtime stories, missed weekend barbecues. But I was building something. Not just a career, but expertise that couldn't be downloaded or automated. By 2000, I was a shift supervisor. By 2005, operations manager. By 2010, I was running the entire West Coast logistics network. Each promotion came with more responsibility, more pressure, more time away from home. Linda understood at first. "It's temporary," I'd tell her, "just until I get established." That's the lie we tell ourselves, isn't it? Just until the next promotion, the next crisis, the next deadline. Before I knew it, Jason was 10 and Lisa was 8. And I was flying to Seattle twice a month to handle distribution problems. My diabetes hit at 48. Stress, irregular eating, no exercise. The doctor said I was lucky it wasn't a heart attack. The divorce came 3 years ago. Linda had been patient for 23 years, but she'd finally had enough. "You love that company more than your family," she said the night she moved out. The worst part? I couldn't argue with her. I'd made choices, and those choices had consequences. But here's what Adrian didn't see when he looked at me. He saw an old guy who didn't understand apps and automation. I saw 28 years of relationships, crisis management, and institutional knowledge that kept Titan running when everything else failed. Like the 2019 dock strike in Seattle, while other companies hemorrhaged money, I used personal relationships built over decades to negotiate alternative routing. Saved us $3.2 million in 1 month, or the 2020 pandemic chaos. When supply chains collapsed worldwide, I didn't panic. I adapted. Drew on military logistics training, leveraged partnerships I'd cultivated for years, found creative solutions that kept our clients' businesses alive. Adrian probably saw that as luck. I saw it as preparation meeting opportunity. The funny thing about getting older in corporate America, they want your results, but not your methods. They want efficiency, but not experience. They want innovation, but not wisdom. Adrian represented everything wrong with modern business. The belief that disruption for its own sake equals progress. As I stood there holding that envelope, Theodore's watch heavy in my pocket, I remembered something my old Navy commander used to say. The best battle is the one you win without fighting. Adrian thought he'd fired me. He had no idea he'd just declared war on someone who actually owned the battlefield. I straightened up, looked him in the eye, and said, "Quietly, I'll be in touch." Then I walked out, leaving the coffee on the table like a small surrender flag. But surrender was the last thing on my mind. What Adrian couldn't know was that in my pocket sat the proof that everything he thought he controlled actually belonged to me. And in 48 hours, I'd be sitting in that same boardroom, but this time in a very different chair. The long game was about to begin. Let me back up to that Sunday evening, 2 days before Adrian decided to end my career. I was sitting in my apartment. Yeah, apartment, not house. The divorce settlement meant Linda got the house in Beaverton, and I got a decent place downtown. Fair enough, considering how much I'd been absent over the years. I was trying to read a book about supply chain management, ironically enough, when my phone rang around 8 p.m. The name on the screen made me sit up straight. Theodore Caldwell. Theodore wasn't just the founder of Titan Logistics. To guys like me who'd been there since the Clinton administration, he was the company's soul. He'd started Titan in 1979 with a single truck and a dream of connecting small businesses to global markets. By the time I joined in '96, he was already a legend, the kind of boss who knew every employee's name and remembered their kids' birthdays. He'd stepped back from daily operations in 2018, exhausted from fighting with investors who cared more about quarterly earnings than long-term stability. But Theodore still owned 47% of the company, and his voice still carried weight in every major decision. When Theodore Caldwell called, "You answered. Period. Cameron." His voice was steady, deliberate, the voice of a man who'd built something lasting. "I need to see you. Tonight." "Of course, Mr. Caldwell. Is everything all right?" "Drive to my house. We'll talk there." An hour later, I was sitting in his study in the West Hills, the smell of old leather and pipe tobacco hanging in the air. Theodore's place hadn't changed in the 15 years I'd been visiting. Same oak paneling, same wall of industry awards, same feeling that you were in the presence of someone who'd actually built something meaningful. He sat behind his desk, a stack of legal documents arranged in front of him. His eyes still carried that sharpness I remembered from the crisis years, when he seemed to think 10 moves ahead of everyone else. "Cameron," he said, pouring 2 glasses of bourbon. "Good stuff, older than my son. I've been watching what's happening to our company. This new CEO they hired without consulting me. The talk about digital transformation and efficiency optimization. Corporate speak for firing good people and replacing them with algorithms." I sipped the bourbon. It burned, but in a good way. "Adrian seems ambitious." Theodore snorted. "Ambitious. That's one word for it. You know who recommended him? The same consulting firm that destroyed Patterson Manufacturing in 2020. Gutted their workforce, automated everything they could, and watched the company collapse within 18 months. No soul left." He leaned forward, his expression growing serious. "I've spent 45 years building Titan into something that matters. Not just a logistics company, but a place where people could build careers, support families, create something bigger than themselves. I won't let some MBA punk with no real-world experience destroy that." That's when he pushed the papers toward me. "I've decided it's time to hand this company's future to someone who's earned it." I blinked, not sure I'd heard correctly. "Theodore, what are you saying?" I'm transferring my remaining shares, all 47%, to you. The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd spent my entire adult life working for other people, following orders, implementing other people's visions. The idea of owning nearly half of a company worth $180 million was beyond my comprehension. I can't afford that. Even if you wanted to sell. Who said anything about selling? Theodore smiled for the first time that evening. This is a gift, Cameron. A transfer of responsibility. You've earned this through blood, sweat, and sacrifice. More than that, you understand what Titan really is. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out his vintage Rolex, the same one I'd seen him wear for decades. He held it carefully, almost ceremonially, before placing it in my hand. This was mine when I signed Titan's founding documents in 1979, he said. It's more than a watch. It's a symbol of responsibility, of continuity. If you sign these papers, you're not just an employee anymore. You're the guardian of everything this company stands for. I stared at the watch, its weight heavy in my palm. The Rolex Submariner, probably worth $15,000, but the real value was in what it represented. Trust, legacy, the weight of 20,400 employees' livelihoods. Why me? I asked quietly. Theodore's expression grew thoughtful. You know, in 1979, when I started this company, I had a choice. I could focus on short-term profits, squeeze every penny, treat employees like replaceable parts. Or I could build something sustainable, something that would last. I chose the harder path. He gestured toward the awards on his wall. Those don't represent profits, Cameron. They represent relationships, community impact. The fact that we've never had a major layoff in 45 years. That's worth more than any stock price. Theodore stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the city lights. I've watched you for 28 years. Watched you miss your son's graduation to manage that Seattle crisis. Watched you sacrifice your marriage to keep this company running. Watched you develop diabetes from the stress of caring too much about doing things right. The bourbon glass felt heavy in my hand. He was listing my failures as if they were virtues. Some people might call that foolish, he continued. But I call it leadership. Real leadership. Not the kind they teach in business school, but the kind that's forged in real crisis, real sacrifice, real consequence. He turned back to me. Adrian Cross represents everything wrong with modern corporate culture. Optimize, automate, eliminate human elements. Maximize shareholder value at any cost. He'll turn Titan into another soulless logistics algorithm within 2 years. Theodore returned to his desk, picking up an elegant fountain pen. But here's what he doesn't understand. This company's real value isn't in our technology or our routes or our efficiency metrics. It's in the institutional knowledge carried by people like you, the relationships you've built, the trust you've earned, the judgment that comes from actually living through crisis. I thought about my kids, Jason, 26 now, working in Seattle as a software engineer. Lisa, 24, finishing her master's degree in environmental science. They'd grown up seeing me stressed, absent, always rushing off to handle some emergency. They loved me, but they didn't respect what I did. To them, I was just another corporate drone who'd chosen work over family. Maybe this was my chance to show them that all those sacrifices had been building toward something meaningful. What exactly are you asking me to do? I said. Theodore smiled, and for the first time that evening, he looked like the man who'd built a company from nothing. I'm asking you to save Titan from people who want to turn it into something it was never meant to be, and I'm giving you the power to do it. I picked up the pen. Wednesday morning hit me like a hangover, even though I'd barely touched that bourbon at Theodore's. I woke up in my downtown apartment with Theodore's Rolex on the nightstand, catching the morning light like it was mocking me. Was I really the owner of a $180 million company, or just a 54-year-old guy having a midlife crisis? I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt hollow. That's the thing about getting what you want. Sometimes it comes too late to fix what you've already lost. My phone had been buzzing since 6 a.m. Text from Jason in Seattle. Dad, heard about Titan. You okay? Another from Lisa. Call me when you're ready to talk. Even one from Linda. Sorry about the job. Let me know if you need anything. The fact that my ex-wife felt sorry for me stung more than Adrian's dismissal. I'd spent 28 years building a reputation, and in one morning it felt like I was just another corporate casualty. I drove to Titan anyway. Force of habit, maybe. Or maybe I needed to see what was happening to the place I'd given my life to build. The parking lot felt different. Conversations stopped when people saw me walking toward the building. Some nodded with sympathy, others looked away awkwardly. Word travels fast in a company of 20,400 people, especially when it's bad news. Daniel Rodriguez caught up with me near the loading dock. Daniel had been my right-hand guy for 12 years, a solid manager who understood that logistics was about people, not just data. "Cameron, man, this is garbage," he said, his voice tight with anger. "Adrian's calling. And all hands meeting at 10. Word is he's planning major restructuring." "How major?" Daniel's expression darkened. "Rumor mill says 400 jobs, mostly warehouse and operations. He wants to automate everything, outsource the rest to some AI platform his buddy from business school is selling. 400 jobs. I thought about the guys in the warehouse, some of them working there since I was a supervisor. Mike Kowalski, 58, with twin daughters in college. Sarah Collins, single mom with a special needs kid who needed the health insurance. These weren't numbers on Adrian's spreadsheet. They were people I'd worked alongside for decades. "There's more," Daniel continued. "Tommy Walsh from Analytics. He recorded yesterday's senior staff meeting. Adrian was pretty clear about his opinion of you." He handed me his phone. I pressed play, and Adrian's voice filled the loading dock, dripping with arrogance. "Look, let's be honest here. Cameron Pierce represents everything wrong with old-school logistics. The guy still uses Excel spreadsheets when we should be using machine learning algorithms. He thinks relationships matter more than metrics. That boomer mindset is exactly what's killing our efficiency." I could hear nervous laughter from the senior staff. The truth is, guys like Cameron had their time. But this is 2024, not 1996. We're going to show the board what real leadership looks like. Lean, fast, data-driven. No more dead weight. Dead weight. 28 years of crisis management, relationship building, and institutional knowledge reduced to dead weight by a 34-year-old who'd never actually managed a supply chain crisis in his life. I handed the phone back to Daniel. "Make sure everyone knows that recording exists. Already done. It's spreading through the company like wildfire. People are pissed, Cameron." That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went to my son's apartment. Jason lived in a trendy Seattle neighborhood, working for a tech startup that developed supply chain optimization software. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Dad?" He opened the door looking surprised. We hadn't spoken face-to-face in 6 months, just the occasional text or brief phone call. "I was in the neighborhood." I lied. Seattle was 3 hours from Portland, and we both knew it. His apartment was everything mine wasn't. Modern, clean, filled with the kind of tech gadgets that Adrian probably thought were the future of business. Jason poured me coffee and we sat awkwardly on his minimalist couch. "So, you got fired," he said finally. "Yeah, seems like it. You okay with that?" I thought about it. "You know, when you were graduating college, I was in Sacramento dealing with a driver's strike. Missed the whole ceremony because I thought the company couldn't survive without me handling every crisis personally." Jason nodded. "I remember. I told myself it was temporary. That once I got established, once I proved myself, I'd have more time for family stuff. Kept telling myself that for 28 years. Dad, let me finish." I set down the coffee. "I made choices. Chose work over family more times than I can count. Your mother was right to leave. You and Lisa were right to build lives that didn't revolve around my schedule." Jason looked uncomfortable. "You did what you thought was right. Did I? Or did I just do what was easy? Because here's the thing, working is easier than parenting. Solving logistics problems is easier than solving family problems. I hid behind being essential at work because I was afraid of failing at home." We sat in silence for a while. Outside, Seattle traffic hummed past his window. "So what now?" Jason asked. I thought about Theodore's Rolex, sitting in my jacket pocket, about the papers I'd signed Sunday night, about 400 people who might lose their jobs because some MBA thought algorithms were more valuable than experience. "Now I try to do something right," I said. I didn't tell him about the ownership transfer, not yet. Some things needed to be proven before they could be explained. Driving back to Portland that evening, I kept thinking about what Jason had asked. What now? For 28 years, I'd been following other people's orders, implementing other people's visions. Tomorrow, for the first time in my adult life, I'd be the one making decisions that mattered. The Thursday board meeting was set for 9 a.m. Adrian would walk in thinking he controlled the room, ready to get approval for his restructuring plan. He'd probably present some slick PowerPoint about efficiency gains and cost savings, reducing 400 human beings to line items on a budget. What he wouldn't expect was me walking through those boardroom doors with Theodore's watch on my wrist and 47% ownership in my back pocket. I'd spent my career being the guy who fixed other people's mistakes. Tomorrow, I'd find out if I could fix my own. The game was about to change, and Adrian Cross had no idea he was playing with someone who'd actually earned the right to be there. Thursday morning, 8:45 a.m. I stood outside the boardroom at Titan Logistics, wearing my best suit and Theodore's Rolex. Through the frosted glass doors, I could see the board members settling into their chairs around that long mahogany table. At the far end sat an empty chair with a placard, majority shareholder. Adrian Cross was already presenting, his voice carrying that confident tone of a man who thought he owned the room. I could make out his silhouette gesturing at projected slides, probably showing cost savings from his restructuring plan. My phone buzzed. Text from Daniel. Whole warehouse crew is watching the security feed. Whatever you're about to do, we're behind you. I took a deep breath and pushed open the doors. Every head turned as my shoes struck the marble floor. The room went silent. Adrian froze mid-sentence, his mouth actually hanging open for a second before he recovered. What is he doing here? Adrian demanded, looking at the board secretary. Security should have been notified that Mr. Pierce is no longer an employee. I didn't rush. I walked with the steady pace of someone who belonged, though every person in that room looked confused as hell. In my hand, Theodore's Rolex caught the morning light streaming through those floor-to-ceiling windows. Good morning, everyone, I said calmly, moving toward the empty chair at the far end. Sorry I'm late. Adrian's face flushed red. This is outrageous. Cameron was terminated. He has no standing here. That's when I placed the ownership transfer documents on the table and sat down in the majority shareholder chair. The leather creaked softly, but in that silent room, it sounded like a gavel. Actually, I said, looking directly at Adrian, I have 47% standing here. The board secretary, Patricia Johnson, was already on her phone, frantically checking the filings. Her face went pale as she read the screen. It's legitimate, she announced to the room. As of Sunday evening, Cameron Pierce is the registered majority shareholder of Titan Logistics Corporation. You could have heard a pin drop. Directors started checking their own phones, tablets, anything to confirm what they were hearing. Adrian looked like someone had hit him with a truck. This is impossible, he stammered. The board wasn't notified. The board is being notified now, interrupted Margaret Willis, our longest-serving director. She was reading her tablet with a slight smile. Mr. Caldwell's transfer is perfectly legal and properly filed. Adrian was spinning now, desperate. Even so, I was hired by this board to implement changes. My restructuring plan will save us millions. Your restructuring plan, I said quietly, pulling out my phone, will eliminate 400 jobs. Let's hear what you really think about that. I pressed play on Tommy's recording. Adrian's voice filled the boardroom. Guys like Cameron had their time. That boomer mindset is exactly what's killing our efficiency. No more dead weight. The effect was immediate. Directors shifted uncomfortably. Margaret Willis actually winced. Even the ones who'd supported Adrian's hiring looked embarrassed. That recording was taken illegally. Adrian started. That recording, I cut him off, was taken during a company meeting by a company employee. And it's been heard by approximately 800 of our 2,400 employees since yesterday. I stood up, placing Theodore's Rolex on the table where everyone could see it. This watch belonged to Theodore Caldwell when he founded this company 45 years ago. It represents something that Adrian here doesn't understand. The difference between owning a business and building a legacy. I looked around the room, making eye contact with each board member. Adrian sees 400 jobs as line items to be eliminated. I see 400 families who depend on us. He sees efficiency metrics. I see the relationships that kept this company alive through 3 recessions, 2 strikes, and a global pandemic. Adrian made one last desperate play. The investors expect modernization. We can't compete with outdated methods. Outdated methods? I laughed, but not in a nice way. In 2019, when the Seattle dock strike threatened to shut down West Coast shipping, Adrian's modern methods would have cost us millions. Instead, I used relationships built over 20 years to negotiate alternative routes. Saved us $3.2 million in 1 month. I picked up the watch, feeling its familiar weight. In 2020, when COVID destroyed global supply chains, algorithms and AI couldn't adapt fast enough. Human judgment, institutional knowledge, and personal relationships kept our clients' businesses alive while our competitors flailed. Margaret Willis leaned forward. Cameron, what exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing we remember what this company actually is, I said. We're not a tech startup. We're not a consulting firm's fantasy of optimization. We're a logistics company built on trust, relationships, and the expertise of people who've actually lived through crisis. I turned to Adrian, who was looking smaller by the minute. As majority shareholder, I'm rescinding your restructuring plan. Those 400 jobs stay. Instead, we're investing in training programs to help our workforce adapt to new technology without replacing human judgment with algorithms. Adrian's face was now completely red. You can't just... Actually, I can. And I am. I sat back down, feeling oddly calm. You'll have 2 choices, Adrian. You can work with me to build something sustainable, or you can find another company to disrupt. The vote was unanimous. Even the directors who'd hired Adrian recognized which way the wind was blowing. After the meeting, I sat alone in the boardroom for a few minutes, looking out at Portland's skyline. My phone buzzed with texts from employees who'd heard the news. Daniel sent a photo from the warehouse floor, dozens of workers applauding. But the text that mattered most came from Jason. Dad, just heard what happened. Maybe we could grab dinner this weekend. I'd like to hear more about what you're building. For the first time in years, I felt like I was building something worth the cost. That evening, I called Linda. We talked for an hour about the kids, about the future, about the choices we'd both made. She was proud of me, she said, for finally standing up for something that mattered. Theodore's watch sits on my desk now, next to a photo of Jason and Lisa. Tomorrow, I start the real work, not just running a company, but building something that honors the sacrifices that got us here. Sometimes justice doesn't come with fanfare. Sometimes it just comes with the quiet satisfaction of knowing that experience, loyalty, and human judgment still matter in a world obsessed with disruption. At 54, I finally learned the difference between having a job and having a purpose. And Adrian Cross? He tendered his resignation that Friday. Last I heard, he was consulting for a cryptocurrency startup. Perfect fit, really. The dead weight, it turned out, wasn't the guy with 28 years of experience. It was the guy who thought experience didn't matter.